Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar this evening. My name is Sarah Pana, and I'm an Education USA advisor at the US-UK Fulbright Commission. And today we'll be talking about studying in the US. We'll talk a little bit about choosing a university in the US, also about how to go about funding your studies, and also what the application process is like. And we will have time to take questions at the end, which you'll be able to enter into the Q&A box. I do ask that you save all of those questions until the end, because it might very well be that I answer your question as we go along. There's a lot of information that we have to cover. I also want to let you know that this webinar is being recorded and will be sent out to you next week. And so don't feel like you have to memorize everything that I'm saying or get everything down as I'm writing it. So you'll have access to the recording where you'll be able to access all the information coming up. So without further ado, I'll tell you start by talking a little bit more about myself. So as I said, my name is Sarah. As you might be able to tell from my accent, I'm not originally from the UK. I'm originally from Chicago in the US, where I completed both my undergraduate degree and my postgraduate degree. Although I've been living in London now for the past 8 years, and I've been working at Fulbright for almost 6 years now. So I'm really excited to be here this evening presenting this information to you. And to tell you a little bit more about who we are at Fulbright and what we do. So at the US-UK Fulbright Commission was established over 70 years ago by a man named Senator Fulbright. And Senator Fulbright himself actually studied in the UK as a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford. And in the aftermath of World War II, he wanted to encourage cultural and educational exchange as a way to promote peace. So we are a not-for-profit organization that's jointly funded by the US and UK government to do just that, to promote peace and cultural understanding through educational exchange. And we do that in a few different ways. So one way that we do that is actually by offering scholarships for postgraduate study and postgraduate research between the US and the UK. And then we also offer an advisory service to assist students, parents, and advisors with applying to US universities. And this advisory service is part of the Education USA network, which is a US Department of State network of over 400 international student advising centers throughout the world. And our aim as Education USA advisors is to offer free and unbiased advice to help UK students study in the US. And we're actually the only official source of US study in the UK. Apologies, my hay fever is acting up a bit today, so apologies if I sneeze a little bit throughout the presentation, but it won't prevent me from presenting the content, don't worry. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about why students choose to study in the US, because there actually are thousands of students that choose to go to the US for their studies each year. And you'll see some of the reasons for that right up here on the screen. And I'll go through each of these in a little bit more detail. So first and foremost is just the quality and the reputation of US universities. There's over 4,500 universities in the US that offer undergraduate degrees compared to about 120 here in the UK. So within that 4,500, as you might imagine, there's a huge range of personality and style. Although as you'll hear me talking about more throughout this presentation, we do caution you to pay as little attention to the rankings as possible and instead focus on fit, which we'll talk about more in a bit. There's so many high quality universities in the US that you've probably never even heard of. Going to the US also offers the opportunity to experience campus life and activities. US universities are known for having a vibrant campus life and encouraging students to be involved outside of the classroom, educating a person not just in the classroom, but outside of the classroom as well. So there's all sorts of extracurricular activities available. You've got your traditional ones, the student government, the sports, cheering on your American football team. But there's also all sorts of random clubs as well. So for instance, American University in DC has a cheese club where students get together and appreciate cheese and try different cheeses, just as an example. Another one of the top reasons that students like to go to the US is because of this focus on teaching and the liberal arts. So the US universities follow an educational idea of what's called a liberal arts curriculum, which provides a well-rounded education. And what this means is that students can apply to university undecided about what they want to study. They can take classes in a variety of different subjects and then decide what it is that they want to major or specialize in. Some students might already know what they want to study, and that's fine too, depending on the institution. They might be able to go ahead and start taking classes in that, but then they may also be able to take other classes as well. So one of my favorite examples is a student that we worked with who was really passionate about computer science, knew that they wanted to study computer science. They went and they started taking those computer science classes. They also had this passion for philosophy, and they were able to take philosophy classes alongside their computer science degree. It also gives you the flexibility to maybe change your mind as you go along. I worked with a student who was really interested in biomedical engineering and applied to the university to study biomedical engineering, started taking classes in that and realized very quickly that it wasn't for her. At that same time was taking a class on feminism and ended up being one of the first students to graduate in their new global gender studies program at the university. And so having that type of flexibility is a really big attraction for students here in the UK, especially if they're not sure what it is that they want to study yet, or maybe they do know what they want to study, but also just want that opportunity to take some other classes alongside that. And then another big reason for going to the US, which might be surprising to some of you, is actually the funding opportunities. And we're going to go into this in a lot more detail later on, but just know for now that there are many opportunities to find a variety of scholarships in the US as compared to the loan-based program that exists here in the UK. And then, of course, going to the US gives you the opportunity to internationalize your CV. As you might imagine, studying abroad is appealing to employers. It shows that you've got a boldness to do something different. It shows you've got interpersonal skills, cross-cultural communication skills, all those types of things. It also gives you the opportunity to build networks of friends and professional contacts from all around the world. There's also a lot of student job opportunities. So when you're a student in the US, you can actually work for up to 20 hours per week during term time and up to 40 hours per week during holidays. And then you also have the option to pursue an additional visa to work for up to a year in the US after graduation. And then lastly, going to the US gives you the opportunity to learn about a new culture. And this is another top reason to go to the US. The US spans 6 time zones and has a great diversity in geography and cultures. There's long summer holidays to explore, and living on campus really gives students the opportunity to get to know a US culture. So these are some of the top reasons that students choose to go to the US each year. And as I'm going through the presentation, I also just want to highlight some of the key differences. So some of them you might already be aware of. So in the US, an undergraduate degree is typically longer, typically 4 years for a bachelor's degree versus 3 here in the UK. When you apply to a US university, you're typically applying to the university as a whole, as opposed to a particular academic department. Again, this reflects that liberal arts curriculum where you might not choose a major until later in your degree, as compared to a very course-specific degree here in the UK. In the US, there's less government control over university. So that means that there is more institutional diversity and freedom, but it also means that there's no set fees or centralized admissions process. The application process is slightly longer and more in depth because the admissions process is more holistic and it's much more than just looking at your grades. Another important thing to note is that if you're planning to apply for any kind of funding, you're going to be applying for that alongside your application for admission. So at the same time that you're applying for admission. And then another thing to be aware of is that law and medicine are studied at the postgraduate degree level in the US. They're not offered at the undergraduate level. And just some differences in terminology, which I may have already slipped and you may have already heard some of these differences. So in the US, when they refer to high school, that corresponds to years 9, 10, 11, and 12 in the US. This corresponds to UK secondary school slightly differently. So in England and Wales, it's typically years 10 through 13. In Northern Ireland, that's typically years 11 through 14. And then in Scotland, the equivalent of about S3 through S6. In the US, we say college, university, school, institution interchangeably to mean university. And so that was something when I first moved to the UK that really threw me. I would be talking about the college that I went to or the school that I went to, and people would be a little bit confused because I was talking about my university. So that's just something to be aware of. What you refer to as a module here in the UK, in the US is referred to as a class or a course. And then what you call a course in the UK, in the US is referred to as a degree program or a major. So this is just some helpful terminology for you to know as you're researching different programs and schools. And to quickly take you through a timeline of the whole process and how it works, we typically recommend beginning to research universities about 1 to 1.5 years before you enroll. And then if you are going to be taking any required admissions exams, which we'll talk about in more detail later, you'll aim to kind of take those the summer, a year before enrollment. And then in your final year of school, you'll be finalizing the selection of where you're applying, usually in the autumn period, about 10 to 12 months before you plan to enroll. And we'll go over some strategies of how to do this. And then about 8 to 10 months before you plan to enroll, you'll put together an application and submit according to the different deadlines. And then in the spring, before you plan to enroll, you'll usually hear back from all the different universities that you apply to with their admissions decisions. And then based off of where you were accepted, you'll notify universities of your decision, and you'll apply for your visa about 1 to 3 months before enrollment. And we have more information about all of these things on our website, and including when it is time for you to head off to the US, we have all sorts of pre-departure information like travel advice, living arrangements, campus life. That's all down the line. And then typically, university in the US typically starts around mid-August to early September. So that's slightly earlier than you would start university here in the UK. Now I'd like to talk about choosing a university, which is an important step in the process of applying to a US university. And it's important to think through this step, and the key is going to be flexible. Having over 4,500 universities in the US means that it's a daunting process to narrow down your prospects. And so we're going to discuss some strategies that you can implement in the process to help you. So it's important to know the context of the US as you consider applying to US study and choosing which institutions you'd like to apply to. As I mentioned earlier, there's no national set standards for universities. And so universities are free to choose their own sets of fees, their own course structure, their own student environment, versus the UK, where institutions have set fees and fairly similar environments. That means that there's so much variety amongst institutions, which we touched on as one of the appeals to US study. And while this can seem daunting, it's actually a great thing to know that with so many universities and so many different types, there's bound to be a university that's a good fit for you. And as I said, we'll talk much more in detail about funding later, but I also like to mention it throughout the presentation, because if funding is something that's important to you, then you need to consider this from step 1 of the choosing process. You want to make sure that you're only applying to universities that offer financial aid to international students. And we'll talk more about this, but just want to make sure that you've got this on your radar now and that you're incorporating this into your choosing process of deciding where you're going to apply. And then something else to keep in mind is that you are able to complete your UCAS applications alongside your US university applications. And we encourage students to do this. When you're applying to your UCAS options and your options here in the UK, you might even be applying to programs that include a year abroad in the US. You'll obviously just want to make sure that you're being mindful of all the different deadlines for both the US universities and the UK universities where you're applying. So the first step in the choosing process is locating what factors are important to you. And we focus a lot on the term fit here at Fulbright, and then finding what school and program is going to be the best fit for you and your personal and academic interests. So there's a lot of different factors for you to consider both in and out of the classroom. You'll be thinking about the types of programs and departments that are available, the location, the availability of funding, the campus size, the academic environment. Is it a more rigorous competitive environment, or is it more inclusive and supportive? So you'll want to start thinking about what factors are important to you and prioritizing them. If you're somebody who doesn't like the cold and snow, for instance, then the East Coast might not be the best for you. Or if you're somebody who's trying to save some money, then you will probably want to keep in mind that living in an urban place is going to be more expensive than living somewhere more rural. And again, I'm going to encourage you to think beyond rankings, but instead think about these variety of factors that are important to you. Rankings in the US don't work the same as they do here in the UK. Some rankings don't rate the quality of teaching or the graduate prospects. Some give weight to how much money a university has, and some of them even just invite universities to peer rank themselves. And so they can be a useful tool perhaps in helping you identify universities that maybe you've never heard of before, because there's so many universities that exist in the US, but they shouldn't be the only method that you use to choose a university. And of course, within this process, you'll want to make sure that you're only applying to universities that you've researched and you could see yourself attending for up to 4 years if you're offered a place. I know personally, when I was applying to university, I got all the way through an application. And then when it was time to pay the fee and submit it, I realized that if I was accepted there, I probably wouldn't be interested in attending compared to some of the other places that I was applying. So I didn't even end up submitting it. So don't be me, figure that out before you fill out a whole application, and make sure that if you're applying somewhere, that it's somewhere that you could actually see yourself attending. So once you've figured out what factors are important to you, the next step is to use that information to begin researching universities. And unlike with UCAS, you're not limited to 5 universities, and in theory, you could apply to as many as you like. However, for time and financial reasons, we typically recommend applying to about 6 to 10 universities. And so to help you jumpstart your process of choosing which universities to apply to and narrowing down those 4,500 institutions, we recommend maybe starting with a list of about 10 to 20 schools that could be a good fit for you, and then doing further research on those 10 to 20 to narrow it down to the 6 to 10 where you apply. So how do you do this? So on our website, we have a whole section about choosing a university in our undergraduate guides. And it includes a list of links to different search engines that you can use to help with the process of narrowing down your choices of universities. So we'll go through an example of one of those now to show what the process looks like. So this is one of my favorite search engines that's linked on our website. It's called the Big Future College Search. And there's a variety of different filters that you can use, including the type, school type, the size of the school, location by state, majors on offer. So this is where you start to apply all those different factors that you've been thinking about and prioritizing. And then something to note about this particular website, if you're somebody who's looking for funding, they have a section here called affordability. And there's under that, you can a financial need met section, and you can select the percentage of need met to help narrow down your list to schools that are going to offer financial aid. And then you can tick the box that's titled Aid for International Students, and that can help you really kind of narrow down your list even further. So you're always going to want to kind of double check this information on each university website, just in case, you know, something with the search engine doesn't have it completely right. But it's a good way to kind of help you start narrowing down that focus. And in this particular search engine, without any filters, there's over 3,600 universities that are listed. So in this case here, I've selected a variety of filters to narrow down that list. So I've selected that I want to attend a 4-year school with fewer than 9,000 students in Ohio. And I've selected that I want 100% of financial need met within that affordability section that I was talking about before. That brought the list of 3,600 down to 4 universities, which is a much more manageable number to start working with. And now what I can do is I can go into each of those different university profiles to find information like application deadlines and links to their website. You can also note further details like the size of the institution, the graduation rate, the average financial aid package, all of that kind of thing. Once you narrow your options, you'll research them further on the university website, and you'll reach out to them directly, remembering that your ultimate goal is to select about 6 to 10 institutions where you'll actually submit an application. And in doing that, we suggest applying to about 2 what we call reach schools, where you'd be thrilled to attend, but it would be a challenge for you to get in. And note that if you're applying to any ultra competitive universities, think Yale, Stanford, MIT, Caltech, etc., that these are reach schools for anybody that's applying to them. We also suggest applying to 3 to 4 what we call match schools, where your academic profile is roughly on par with their average applicants. And then we also suggest applying to 2 what we call likely admittance schools. So think of this as being similar to like a UCAS insurance choice, where your application is likely to be very competitive. And to do research on these universities, you'll want to look to university websites. Some of them will even include a profile of the average admitted applicant, so you can compare yourself to that. On the websites, you'll also be able to find more information about their programs, maybe any campus virtual tours, more about student life, sports, student housing, financial aid, and you'll also want to check out what resources they have for international students. And then, of course, you'll want to take a look at the university's social media channels. That will really help you get a feel for the college, as well as the university's personality and the different things that they're focused on. You may also choose to talk with teachers, professors, or professionals in the field that you want to pursue to ask for their advice on universities that may be a good fit for you. Although something to be aware of is that it might be that people here in the UK aren't as familiar with all of the universities in the US, but it might be that you know somebody who is quite familiar with specific universities in the US and has experience, and so they might be a good resource for you as well. The best place to find the most up-to-date information is going to be the university website to make sure that you're getting the most accurate information. And if you do have any questions as you go, know that universities want to hear from you. You can reach out to them, call them, email them. You'll just want to make sure that it's the student that's calling and reaching out and making those connections as opposed to the parents, because it's the student who will be applying to the university and looking to get that offer of admission. So in these next few slides, I'm just going to highlight a few different types of universities that maybe you've never heard of before, just to kind of give you an idea of some of the universities that are at offer in the US. So if you're looking for competitive schools, but which are small, collaborative, and offer a lot of research opportunities, consider a liberal arts college like Middlebury College, which is located in Middlebury, Vermont. It's known to be a liberal and artsy area of the US, and it's known for its beautiful waterfalls and hiking opportunities. Or if you're a female student who loves palm trees and sunshine, you might consider Scripps College, which is a women's college in Claremont, California. Or perhaps you're looking to experience some southern hospitality, warm weather, and country music. You might look at Vanderbilt University, which is a well-known private research university in Nashville, Tennessee. And I always like to include this note on the Ivy League, just to provide a little bit of context and information. The Ivy League is historically a sports league between the 8 oldest universities in New England. So it is 8 universities that have been playing sports together for hundreds of years. It's not the Russell Group, and that there's no becoming the Ivy League. So for instance, universities like MIT, Stanford, they're not in the Ivy League. They will never be part of the Ivy League because they weren't part of this historical sports league. So just for you to be aware of that. Something else to know about the Ivy League, all of the universities in it are private research universities. So if you're only looking at Ivy League universities, then you'd be limiting your opportunities to explore other institutions such as liberal arts colleges or women's colleges or specialist institutions. Liberal arts colleges in the US are also extremely competitive. They offer a lot of undergrad research opportunities, but they'll never be the Ivy League, or they might not ever be as well known in the UK, despite being really top quality schools. And something else, although we advise you to take rankings with a grain of salt, if you're thinking about the top 1% of US universities, that would be over 40 institutions. And I'm guessing that many of you can't name 40 institutions in the US off the top of your head. And that's the top 1% of institutions in the US. Something else to know about the Ivy League is that they're extremely competitive. So if you're only applying to Ivy League universities, then you are minimizing your chances of ultimately going to the US. So you'll want to make sure that you're applying to that variety of different US institutions. Now that we've talked about choosing a university, I'd like to talk more about funding, because this is one of the top things that we get asked about, as you might imagine. So in this section, I'm going to run through the costs that you can anticipate, different sources of funding that you can pull from, and strategies that you can implement to find funding. So this page includes some of the different costs that you can expect, right, starting from the application process itself. So in terms of application expenses, if a university requires an admissions test, which we'll talk about more later, such as the SAT or the ACT, the cost for those tests is typically between $100 to $200 per test. Each university application also incurs its own fee, although many universities do offer fee waivers, but each application for a university will typically cost between $50 to $100. There's also going to be fees for your visa if you're accepted to the US, your embassy appointment, and there'll also be something called a SEVIS fee, which is essentially the international student database that the Department of Homeland Security uses. Then when it comes to university, there'll be the cost of the tuition and fees. And something to keep in mind here is that costs can vary significantly since each university can set their own tuition and fees rates. Fees are typically mandatory and cover things like the student union, school athletics, and membership to the university gym. Something to be aware of if you're looking at university websites is that they'll include the cost of attendance on their website, and the cost of attendance is going to include tuition and fees, but also it'll include things like room and board, personal expenses. Sometimes it'll even include travel home, compared to a UK website, which might only list the tuition and fees. And then in addition to the cost of attendance listed on a US university website, there might be other expenses that you'll still have to consider. Costs like eating out, clothing, entertainment, that kind of thing. And as I mentioned earlier, the cost of living can vary widely depending on where your university is located. The cost of rent might be different than living on campus, so whether you live on campus or off campus. If you're located somewhere where maybe you'll need a car, those are all different costs to consider. So some of the things to think about. The good news is there are a variety of funding opportunities available, and it is possible to have an affordable US university education, and many students are able to fully fund their studies without loans. The key is going to be putting in the time and effort to seek out and apply for funding. So where does the money come from? We'll go more into some of these, but it's good to know that typically there are 4 sources of funding for study in the US. And the first, to be open and honest, is typically personal and family funds. US universities typically expect families to prioritize students' education and invest in that education. And so, especially if your family has the means and can afford to do so, a US university is going to expect a family to invest in their students' education. Another big source of funding is the US universities themselves. There's 2 types: need-based aid and merit-based scholarships, which are kind of the main types, and I'll explain more about those on the next slide. It is going to vary how much need a university can meet. So if financial aid is important, you'll need to look out for and apply only to universities that are offering financial aid for international students. Another source of funding is external funding bodies, which are external organizations from a university that provide scholarships and funding. And then as a final resort, there are loans. Something to be aware of is that you cannot take your UK student loan to the US. And if you were to get a loan in the US, you'd be required to have a US citizen or a US permanent resident to co-sign that loan. And so loans can be a bit tricky. You can technically take out a UK third-party loan, but if you were to do that, we'd caution you to be really careful about their high interest rates and their payback terms that might even require you to start paying back the loan before you've completed your studies. So just to be aware of. If you are somebody who has US citizenship or dual US citizenship, be aware that you are able to apply for loans and federal loans through by completing something called the FAFSA form. Now, it might be that you have to pull from some or all of these different sources to fund your education. And so it might be that you're having to be strategic in how you fund your studies. To talk in more detail about university funding, this type of funding is ideal because it doesn't have to be paid back. There are two main types of university funding. Funding that's likely to be awarded on the basis of financial need based on a family's annual income. And then there's also funding based on merit-based scholarships. So things like academic merit that are based on maybe like your A-level marks or your admissions exam scores, or you might receive some type of combination of funding that includes all of the above. To talk in more detail, need-based aid is based on financial need. So universities will calculate a family's expected family contribution, and then they'll compare that to the total cost of attendance, and they'll try to meet that gap. And it's going to vary how much of that gap they can meet. So some can only meet 20% of the gap, some can meet 80%, some can meet 100%. So look for this information while doing research if you need funding to get to the US. And just to kind of explain, because that's a lot of mathematics terms, with a little bit more of an example. So let's say a university costs $50,000 per year, and your family can afford to pay $10,000 per year. So you've now got $40,000 that's left. And the university is going to say how much they can meet of that 40,000. So some universities will say we can meet 100% of that 40,000. Some universities might say we can only meet 50% of that 40,000. And so they would give you 20,000, you'd have your 10,000, and then you'd still be 20,000 short each year that you'd be trying to figure out how to pay. So if you are somebody who's planning to apply for need-based aid, and it's going to be important for you to go, you'll want to make sure that you're only applying to universities that commit to meeting 100% of a family's need, basically. And then, as I said, you'll want to also make sure that scholarships are available to international students, because sometimes they'll have money available for domestic students, but it won't necessarily be available to international students. And also, just to be aware, if you're a top athlete, sports scholarships might also be available through the athletic recruitment process. And we have a lot more information available about that on our website if you go to our website and search for sports scholarships or athletic scholarships. For more information on university funding, you can also check the university website and see what's available for international students. Make sure that you're being proactive to find the information you need. Often the process for applying for financial aid is actually fairly straightforward, and it's integrated into the admissions application. So you're just going to go to the website and you're going to follow all the steps that they tell you to follow and complete that application that way. So as an example, we'll go to the Rice financial aid page. And this gives you a breakdown of not just tuition and room and board, but also includes fees, books, and personal expenses, such as flights home. So you'll see here that it includes all those different costs and the cost of attendance. You can also find information about merit scholarships and the types of recipients. And you'll note that it's integrated into the admissions process. And I should say that Rice University is a big university, a well-known university in Texas, if you're not familiar with it, but very well known in the US. And their page also has a page with funding information specifically for international students. And you can see on this page that international students are also considered for need-based aid, and 100% of demonstrated need is met with grant aid. They use something called the CSS profile to gather information about a student's financial background to determine their financial aid package. So as I said, it'll be important to check each university website and whether funding is available for international students. As you might imagine, it breaks our heart when somebody reaches out to us and shares that they've gotten into their a US university, maybe their dream US university, but they didn't realize that the university doesn't offer funding for international students, or they didn't realize that they would be offered some funding, but wouldn't be able to meet 100% of their family's demonstrated need. And there's not a whole lot that we can do at that point. And so if funding is an important consideration, you'll definitely want to ensure that there is funding at the university for international students, and you'll want to make sure that you're checking into this early. I also want to talk in a little bit more detail about funding bodies. Funding bodies might include a wide range of professional, charitable, or government organizations that are external to the university. They can be thought of as niche scholarships, as they have specific criteria based on the mission of that particular funding body. So some examples of things people might receive scholarships are maybe somebody's from a particular country of origin, a particular ethnicity or religious faith. Maybe they have an interest in a particular field. Maybe there's scholarships for a certain gender, or maybe interests or talents. So for example, there's, probably scholarships out there for women interested in engineering. Excuse me. If you're unique in any way, there's likely to be a funding body with a scholarship that's out there for you. You just have to find it. And there are some scholarships that are very generous scholarships that kind of offer full funding for a university. They tend to be quite specific to a particular university, like an external funding body that funds an education at a particular university. So one example of that is the Morehead Kane Scholarship. And the Morehead Kane Scholarship looks for students who meet qualities of having leadership, character, scholarship, and physical vigor. And they provide a 4-year, fully funded educational experience for students of the highest caliber at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. So that's an example of like a very generous external funding body. There are thousands of funding bodies out there, so searching will require time and dedication to sift through the different scholarship listings and to submit separate applications to each of those bodies. And so for this reason, we do encourage students to first apply for university funding opportunities and then for the external funding. And again, on our website, we have a link to different scholarship search engines that you can use. And now I'd like to talk about some different approaches to a funding strategy, just some different ways to think about it. So one way that you could approach funding is by exploring universities in a place with a lower cost of living. So just like in the UK, London's going to be more expensive than living in Lancaster. And in the US, living in places like New York or California are going to be more expensive than living in states like Ohio or Georgia. As I said earlier, American universities will list the full estimated cost of attendance on their website, which includes the cost of living and personal expenses. So you can scope out places with lower costs of living. Another strategy is to look at programs with lower tuition. In the US, we have something called state universities, which are universities that receive funding from the state to help fund their educational system. And so for that reason, they tend to be programs that have lower tuition costs. And so their tuition might be lower than tuition at private universities. And then as discussed, you'll want to look at different funding opportunities, the different funding opportunities that are available. Another option that I like to make sure that I mention is something called community college, which is an increasingly popular choice in the US, as it's an alternative pathway to university that can help save a lot of money. Community colleges generally award what's called associate's degrees, which is not a degree that's offered here in the UK. It's a degree that often has a professional vocational focus, but they also, however, have programs that allow students to take part in something that's called a 2+2 transfer pathway. So what that would involve is starting your studies at a community college, completing 2 years, and then transferring to a 4-year university, doing another 2 years to receive a bachelor's degree from that university. And there's a lot of community colleges that have transfer agreements. So as you'll see here on this screen, for example, Los Angeles Valley College is a 2-year community college that has a partnership with universities like UCLA, University of Southern California, and Cal Poly. So it can be a really great way to kind of get to the US, save some money, and then transfer to a 4-year institution. My husband actually went to community college himself, did 2 years at a community college, and then transferred and completed 2 years at the 4-year institution that I attended, which is where I met him. And he saved a lot of money in doing so. In fact, his first 2 years at community college, the tuition costs were so low that he was able to work alongside his studies and pay for those fees as he went. So that saved him a ton of money. Community colleges tend to be much less expensive than four-year universities. So you can save thousands by paying the significantly lower tuition of a community college for 2 of those 4 years of your degree. And they also tend to have smaller classes, which can be especially valuable for the introductory classes that students tend to take during their first couple of years of university. It also means you get more contact with professors. Another benefit is they generally involve less rigorous application processes, and they typically have less strict entry requirements than a four-year university. So if you're a student who's got BTECs or OCR or other similar qualifications, you may choose to apply to a community college. And many of them do not require an admissions exam score for admission. There's more information about community colleges on our website, including a link to a community colleges webinar that we held last year. So finally, I'd like to talk about some funding tips. As I mentioned, since applying for funding is simultaneous to the admissions process, you'll want to begin your search for funding early. It's going to take time to research funding at all the different schools where you want to apply, as well as those external scholarships. So make sure that you're taking the time to do that, and make sure that you're looking at specific university websites, as well as online scholarship searches from that list on our website. You're going to want to consider having a funding strategy. So to fully fund your studies, you may need a combination of all the different types of funding that we've discussed: family funds, university funds, external funding bodies, loans as a last resort. And so you'll want to investigate each of the different types of funding. And it's going to be important to remain flexible in choosing your universities. You'll want to consider not just applying to where thousands of other UK students are applying, or to universities where you're not going to be competitive. If there's going to be a university where you're going to stand out, maybe you'll be the only student from the UK applying, you may have more of a chance of getting that admission and that funding. Now that we've talked about choosing a university and funding your studies, I'd like to talk more about the application process, because it is different than applying for a university through UCAS. And so I'll talk about that now. So first and foremost, what are universities in the US looking for? And they're first going to be looking for your academic achievement. That's the first thing they're going to be looking at, which is going to be measured by your results. So those GCSE results, or those national fives, as well as any A-levels, A-level predictions, hires, advanced hires. And then if an admissions test score is required, then they'll be looking at that admissions test score as well. And as I said, you can check university websites. They might have their average applicant profile on their website, so you can have a sense of how you compare. However, academic achievement alone, while very important, and while it is going to be the first thing that universities look at, it's not going to guarantee entrance to the most competitive US universities. The process is much more holistic than it is here in the UK. They're also going to be looking at things like academic fit, reasons for pursuing a degree at their institution, and how it's going to help you towards your goals. So for instance, let's say you're applying to universities in New York and you're applying to NYU. NYU wants to know, what is it about NYU that you love? You're not going to want to write a whole essay about how much you love New York and how much you want to be in New York, because they're going to say there's lots of universities in New York. You know, why aren't you applying to Columbia? They're going to want to know, what is it about NYU? Is there a particular program? Is there a particular campus activity or a mission that speaks to you? So that's something else that you'll be including in your application. You'll also be including your extracurriculars. There's a big focus on extracurriculars in the US. As I said earlier in this presentation, the US universities are big on educating students both outside and within the classroom. This doesn't mean that, you know, right now you have to be doing everything with extracurriculars, but you are going to want to highlight what you are involved in. Universities are going to be interested in how you spend your time outside of the classroom, and they're going to want to see that in your application. They'll also be looking at your personal attributes. As I said, this is a holistic admissions process, and universities are looking to diversify their campuses and classrooms and bring a variety of different people to their campus. And so this is why they want to know who you are. So they'll be figuring these things out by looking at your interests in your academic field of choice, or the different things that you're interested in possibly studying. They'll be looking for examples of your character, maybe examples of your leadership abilities, So these are all different things that they'll be looking for in your application. And how exactly are you going to show these things in your application? So these are some of the different application components that I'll go through briefly here and then in more detail on the upcoming slides. So unlike the UK, in the US, you're going to apply to each university individually rather than through a centralized body like UCAS. As I said earlier, you can apply to as many universities as you'd like, though for time and class purposes, we typically recommend applying to about 6 to 10 institutions. Though we don't have UCAS, there is something in the US called the Common Application. About 900 universities use the Common Application, and this is a system that helps you streamline the demographic information aspect of the application. It's not UCAS because you're still going to have to tailor all of your applications to each university. There might be some different questions asked. There might be some different supplemental essays, but it is a way to kind of help streamline some of that information. And there will be kind of one main essay within UCAS that you'll be able to submit to all of the universities that you apply, but not within the Common Application, apologies, within the Common Application that you'll be able to submit to all the universities that you apply to in the Common Application. There's no standard process for applications or deadlines or requirements. It does vary by university, although they tend to follow a fairly similar format. And so you are just going to kind of want to make sure that you're staying on top of those deadlines. Each university is going to set its own deadlines and application requirements. So, you know, most universities might have an early deadline at sometime in November, but it might be November 1st, it might be November 15th. Most universities are going to have a regular application deadline sometime in January, but again, it could be the 1st of January, it could be the 15th of January. So you'll just want to make sure that you're keeping track of all of that information. I typically recommend that when students are doing their research, they get a Microsoft Excel or a Google spreadsheet, and they just kind of, you know, have lots of columns and lots of rows, and they just kind of organize it in whatever way is going to help them keep track of it all, because it's a lot of information to research and to keep track of. Something that I can reassure you about is that most applications are going to at least follow a similar format. And so you are going to be able to reuse or adapt the materials that you prepare for each university. Most universities are going to include an application form with your basic demographic information. Some of them are going to be asking for admissions test scores. They'll be asking for a transcript, which I'll talk about in more detail in a bit. You'll typically be required to submit 2 to 3 essays, as well as 2 to 3 recommendation letters from representatives at your school. And then, of course, that application fee of about $50 to $100 per application. So now to talk in a little bit more detail about admissions exams. So first of all, the role they play in the US. So in the US, there's no national curriculum at the secondary school level. So admissions exams serve as a way to evaluate applicants from diverse areas in schools. So standardized tests and admission tests were created for this purpose. The first thing that you'll want to do in your research is check to see if admissions exams are even required. Even before COVID, more and more universities were making these exams optional or not required. And then especially during COVID times, a lot of universities got rid of the requirements to take an admissions exam, and then they just haven't brought it back. That being said, there are some universities that required an admissions exam all the way through COVID. There's some that have decided now that we're a few years into COVID, they're going to bring that admissions exam back. And so just incorporate that into your research. But you can do that. You might even just choose, if you're somebody who doesn't like admissions exams or doesn't want to spend the time and the money preparing for one, you might choose to only apply to universities that don't require one. If you are going to be taking an admissions exam, you'll typically want to make sure that you're taking that in the summer, about a year before you enroll. So if you're somebody who's looking to kind of enroll at a US university in autumn of 2023, now is a really good time to be taking that admissions exam. Some students might take it slightly earlier in kind of the spring. Some might take it a little bit later in kind of the fall of their final year of school. But typically the autumn tends to be the last time, latest that you would want to take those admissions exams in order for them to be submitted alongside your applications. Universities will require, if they do require an exam, it'll be the ACT or the SAT. In terms of choosing between the ACT or SAT, one is not considered better than the other. It's just about what the best fit is for you. What I typically recommend is that you take a timed full-length practice test of each one. You can find like a free one online and see which one you do better on. I personally did much better in one of the exams than the other. And so I wouldn't say like, oh, I'm just going to take this one because I've heard of it before and I haven't heard of the other one before. I really do highly recommend kind of like sitting down, taking a practice test under time conditions and seeing which one you do better in, and then preparing for that one. That can be a good way. Although you may also just choose to go online and see what testing centers are available near you when the tests are available, because some of that might also factor into your decision that, you know, if only one of them is offered near where you live, or the dates for one of them work better for you than the other. That's some different things to consider. We do recommend preparing for those exams in advance. And so there's a lot of free preparation materials available online. So if you are studying for one of those exams, I would recommend preparing for it in advance and doing some revision for that in advance of sitting the exam. You'll also be required to submit a transcript. This is something that your school is actually going to submit to a US university on your behalf. And what this is going to include is a listing of your academic qualifications and your marks. So if you took GCSEs, it's going to include your GCSE grades. If you took National Fives, it's going to include your National Fives. If you've sat any A-levels, it will include your A-levels. If you've got A-level predictions, it's going to include those predictions. Hires, advanced hires, all that is going to be on this transcript. As I said, it's generated by your school, but you might need to provide your school with the information about what to include on this. We do have templates available on our website. We have a whole section on our website called Resources for UK Schools. So if you were at a school that has maybe never supported a student with going to the US before, they can use our resources to help them. So they can go and download the template online and just kind of fill in the template with all of your information. Something to be aware of is that there's no direct conversion between UK and US marks. So you'll be wanting to report your marks in the British system. So you aren't going to be converting anything to a US GPA. You're going to be reporting those GCSE grades, those A-level predictions, those National 5 grades. And universities in the US, they get thousands of students who apply from the UK each year. And so they are going to be very familiar with those marks from the UK. So you don't need to worry about trying to convert it into the US system. Many universities are going to have schools submit the transcript online. If they do have a different system in place, then you would just follow whatever system it is. Schools might also be asked to submit a school report, which just contains information about the school itself for context. So it usually includes information on where the school is located, how many students they have, what types of classes are offered at the school, that type of thing. And it just helps an admissions officer who's reading your application understand your application in the context of your school. You're also likely going to be required to gather 2 to 3 recommendation letters. These letters should be used as a marketing tool for you as an applicant. And we typically recommend choosing somebody who's able to talk about you both in and outside of the classroom. Usually a US university is going to require 1 letter from somebody called a counselor and 1 to 2 letters from a teacher. The counselor position doesn't exist in the UK in the same way that it does in the US. So typically somebody in the UK might ask like a head of sixth form or a form tutor or a head of careers, or some of those roles will tend to be the person that serves as the counselor for students here in the UK. And then you would typically choose one or 2 of your A-level teachers or your higher and advanced higher teachers to write a recommendation letter for you from the teacher point of view. I'm sure that referees are going to have particular areas that they can speak to about you, but you might direct your referees to write about your ability to succeed at university, your past academic performance, observation about your performance in class or on assignments, any school awards, maybe subject knowledge, maybe your ability to positively contribute to the university department or to campus life, maybe your leadership abilities, your involvement in the school. It's generally going to be your responsibility to choose and liaise with your referees. So you're just going to want to make sure that you're meeting with them ahead of time, explaining to them what it is that they need to do, making sure that they're aware of any deadlines and submitting any of the documents that they need by the deadlines. And one thing that we encourage is that you encourage your referees to avoid being restrained and too modest. As you might imagine, American referees tend to write in a very enthusiastic tone, using very positive and descriptive language to discuss the applicant both in and out of the classroom, and to talk about the applicant personally. And so you'll want to keep in mind what's being written about your American counterparts when preparing your UK referees to write their letters. So definitely encourage them to refrain from being too restrained or from using modest language. Not the time to be modest. Have them write enthusiastically about you. And the other biggest tip that I can say is if they can write about specific examples about you. So rather than just saying you're intelligent, you're kind, giving examples of how you've shown your intelligence, how you've shown your kindness, that can really help illustrate it to the person reading that application. So the essay. So this again will be you, the students that are writing this. And this is one of the most important part of the application process for undergraduate study in the US. A strong essay can help set you apart from other applicants and give you an opportunity to showcase yourself to a university. So especially if you're a student who's planning to apply to a lot of highly competitive institutions, maybe you've got the top grades, maybe you've got the top test scores, but if you're applying to a highly competitive institution, so does everybody else that's applying. So the essay is a way that can really help you set yourself apart. An essay for a US university is not your UCAS personal statement. Rather than submitting an explanation of your interests and achievements in a particular field or of study as you would via UCAS, you're going to be asked to respond to between 1 and 3 essay questions on a US university application. Each university is going to set its own question as well as desired length for your responses. However, if you are submitting applications through the Common App system, there'll be 1 essay question that goes to all universities, and then there's going to be supplemental questions that are unique to each institution. So just to give you a little bit of a flavor for what these types of essay questions are, I'm going to read to you a couple of the different prompts that you might be able to choose from as your main essay on the Common App. So one essay prompt that you could choose: reflect on a time when you questioned or challenged a belief or idea. What prompted your thinking? What was the outcome? Another prompt that you could choose from: describe a topic, idea, or concept you find so engaging that it makes you lose all track of time. Why does it captivate you? What or who do you turn to when you want to learn more? So as you can see here, US universities are really trying to learn more about you as a person and understand you as a person by answering these essay prompts. And so it is quite different from a UCAS personal statement. It's unlikely that you're going to be able to compose one essay that's going to sufficiently answer questions posed by multiple universities. However, many students are able to reuse elements of essays for different universities. Some tips that I have in terms of writing these essays: first of all, make sure that you answer the question fully. I think we've all been guilty before of getting so caught up in writing something that we forget what the original question was, and then we go back and read it and we're like, oops, I haven't actually answered this question. So make sure you're answering the question. Also make sure that you're using clear, concise language, avoiding vague or empty statements or cliches. If you do reuse an essay, be so careful to submit the correct essay to the correct university, and double check that all of the references to the university within the text are to the correct university. You don't want to say, I'm so excited to apply to ABC University when actually you're applying to XYZ University. Proofread extensively and ask others to proofread your essays and offer their feedback. And most importantly, be yourself. Don't give the admissions officers the answers that you think that they want to hear. Just give them the truth. Think about what sets you apart and let your personality come through in the essay. We've got more tips about this on our website, and so I would highly recommend checking out our website for more information about the essays. We also have links to example essays from different university websites. So there's different universities in the US that actually post successful essays of students who are now attending their university. So I really recommend checking out some of those because it really gives you an idea of the flavor of what a US essay, university essay looks like. All right, so that was the application process in a nutshell. And so before I get to the Q&A section, I also just want to talk about some other opportunities in the US and also some other ways that we can help. So first and foremost, there's a few different opportunities available to you if you decide that a full undergraduate degree in the US is not for you. One is to go to the US while at a UK university through university exchange programs. So many UK universities have established exchange programs with US universities or with US-based study abroad programs. So for example, University of Manchester has partnerships with 18 universities in the US. This might be a logistically simpler way to go to the US, as your university here in the UK will help you arrange it. There's also a variety of summer institutes. There's something called the Study of the US Institutes for Student Leaders. These are intensive short-term academic programs whose purpose is to provide groups of undergraduate student leaders with a deeper understanding of the United States while simultaneously enhancing their leadership skills. So you could look into that if that's something of interest. Or if you really love America, you can actually spend your degree studying it. You can study an American Studies degree here in the UK, and they often incorporate a year in the US as part of your degree as well. There's also different internships or work experiences available through BUNAC or through Camp America, or you might decide, I'm going to stay here in the UK for my undergraduate degree, but maybe at the postgraduate stage, I'll head to the US, and we'll be right here to give a similar webinar at the postgraduate level and similar advice at the postgraduate level for you if you decide to do that down the line. And then Fulbright also offers those monetary awards at the postgraduate level if you are looking for financial help at the postgraduate level as well. And to talk a little bit more about the different ways that we can help here at Fulbright, I first want to mention the Sutton Trust US program, which is a program that is run by some of my colleagues here at the Fulbright Commission in partnership with the Sutton Trust. This is a program for high-achieving Year 12 students from low-income backgrounds who attend state schools. It's a program that starts taking place in Year 12, and you get the opportunity to take part in residentials here in the UK. And then, if COVID allows, go to the US for a week over the summer, stay on campus at US universities, and visit different US universities and take part in American culture and decide if US study is something that might be right for you. And then as you enter your final year of school, you can apply for continued support through the program, and the program helps you through the whole process of applying for admission and financial aid at US universities. And the program is free to take part in. It doesn't pay for your tuition in the US, it's just free to take part in the program, and then they help you apply to US universities. So if that's something that you're interested in, if you're going to be entering Year 12 in England and Wales, Year 13 in Northern Ireland, or I think S5 in Scotland this upcoming year, and you're at a state school, and you're a high achieving student, then that's a program that I highly recommend looking into. You can find out more information on our website. Applications for that program typically open in about November time, if that's something that you're interested in. Other ways that we can help, as I mentioned already, our website is a really good resource for information. Under the Going to the USA section, we have a whole undergraduate guide with details on all the topics that I've talked about tonight: choosing a US university, funding your studies, and applying. And so it can be a really good resource for, without having to rewatch the entire webinar. Every time you want to refer back to it, you can go to the website and find all the information that I've discussed there, and it is able to go into more detail. We also take questions by email. So you can email us and ask any questions. We also offer the opportunity for you to book a one-to-one video appointment with an advisor. So to reach out to us, you can just, again, go to our website, go to the Contact Us page, and if you scroll all the way to the bottom, you have the option to book an appointment with an advisor, or to fill out the contact form to send us an email. We typically only have about like 3 video appointments available a week at the moment. And so if that is something that you're interested in, just check that out, and make sure that you attend so that you're not taking a spot away from other people. But we do enjoy speaking to people on those appointments. And so feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions as you go along in the process. And then we do have different events about studying in the US, both online and in person when we can. So take a look. We tend to, if you've ever been to a What University Live fair, we tend to be present at those fairs in the University Zone, as well as other fairs throughout other parts of the UK. We also offer our own USA College Day Fair at the end of September. So we are delighted to be returning to an in-person event in London this year on the 23rd and 24th of September. It is a free fair to attend. There are going to be over 120 universities from the US that are here in the UK looking to recruit students here in the UK. So if that is something that interests you, I'll put the link in the chat during the Q&A section. You can go to our website and sign up to be notified when registration opens for that. While it is a free event to attend, you do have to sign up for a ticket in advance, a timed entry slot, just so that we can manage numbers of people coming into the venue. And so tickets will become available kind of in late August, but you can sign up to be notified for when those tickets are available. It's a really good opportunity to meet different US universities. Oftentimes, the person who comes from the US to the UK is the person who reads applications from UK students. And so the person that you speak to that day might very well be the person who reads your application if you apply to that university. So it's a really great opportunity, and I highly recommend attending if you can. All right, so that's the presentation part of this session. Thank you for your patience, and I hope that you have some time to process that. If you do have any questions, now is the time to go ahead and start putting those in the Q&A box. I do ask that you keep your questions general, and that questions that might be helpful to the whole group. If you do have any really specific questions, I'd ask that you reach out to us over email. I can put our email address in the chat as well. It's advising@fulbright.org.uk. And I do just want to remind you that this session has been recorded, and so you will be able to access the recording. So if for any reason you need to head off and you're not able to stay for this Q&A portion, know that I'll be sending out the recording from this session next week. So I'll stop sharing my screen. You can see me, and I'll bring the Q&A over here. And as you put questions into that Q&A box, I will go ahead and just put a couple of links in the chat here for you to access. So USA College Day. That's the link for USA College Day, to sign up to be notified when tickets become available. And to contact us via email, you can email us at advising@fulbright.org.uk if you have any questions that are more specific. Okay. So somebody's asking, if you go to a different sixth form, is it possible to ask for letters of recommendation from the teachers from your previous school? So that's a really good question. And I would say that it depends. And this is something that you may wish to check in with the universities where you're planning to apply, because I've talked to universities about this before and they've given me different answers. Some universities are quite keen for you to have recommendations from people that you're studying with in your final 2 years of high school. So, you know, from sixth form. But other universities are very happy for it to be from somebody, provided, you know, for it to be somebody that you took your GCSEs with. So it just kind of depends. Something to be aware of, that in terms of that counselor role, the person who's writing the counselor recommendation and who's submitting the transcript from the school, that's going to have to be somebody that's at your current school. And so your counselor is going to have to be somebody at your current school. It might be possible to have a teacher recommendation from your previous school, but you'll probably want to just check in with the universities where you're applying. And if you do decide to do that, you'll probably just want to make sure that your current school is aware that a teacher from your previous school is writing one of the letters, and that the teacher from your previous school is aware of who's doing what at your current school. Somebody's asking, do US universities give preference to UK state schools over private schools? Not as far as I know. This is something that you're welcome to kind of, if you're coming to college day, for instance, you can always ask a US university and see what their answer is. I would imagine that they're looking at each applicant holistically and evaluating each applicant individually. And so, but yeah, you can always double check with universities if you want to be sure. Somebody's asking, where would be the best place to find external funding bodies? And so I would say first and foremost on our website is, so if you go to our website, we have the funding section, and then we have a page about external funding bodies, and there's different search engines there. Another thing to look out for is on our YouTube channel, we have a whole list of US admissions webinars. So for instance, this webinar from today, once I've got the recording up next week, we'll go into this playlist of US admissions webinars. And there's one that we held in recent years that's all about external scholarships. And so you might wish to check out that one about external scholarships. If you're having any trouble finding it and you need me to send you the link, feel free to email in and I can send that link to you. Somebody is asking what sort of undergraduate courses you should study in order to study law later. So this is actually a good question for anybody who might be interested in law, because as I said earlier, law is not studied at the undergraduate level in the US. It's only studied in the postgraduate level, but I do know of students who go to the US and study an undergraduate degree in another subject, and then they return to the UK and they follow the route to become a lawyer here in the UK. Just the same as a student here, there's students here in the UK who study a non-law degree at the undergraduate level and then become a lawyer. So that is an option. It really kind of depends on what you're interested in studying, to be honest. I know students that have studied history. I know students that have studied political science, students that have studied economics, for instance. And so it kind of just, it's an opportunity for you, if you're interested in returning to the UK and becoming a lawyer, but you'd like to study in the US, it's kind of an opportunity for you to explore your interests beyond just law. And I would imagine that you'll be able to find a relation to law in whatever your interests are. And so I would encourage you to explore your interests at the undergraduate level, and then you could come back here and follow the steps to become a lawyer. Somebody's asking if your A-level results need to be top if your SAT scores are extremely high. And so if you are applying to highly competitive institutions that are looking at top grades and top test scores, a high SAT or ACT score isn't going to make up for lower A-level results. It's really those A-level results are going to be the kind of most important thing that those highly competitive institutions are looking at. And a high SAT or ACT score can complement those A-level grades, but it's not going to make up for lower A-level grades. It's still going to be really important for your A-level results to be high if you're applying to those highly competitive institutions. There are over 4,500 institutions in the US, so you're not going to need top A-level results for all of them. And so, if you're somebody where you're concerned that maybe you're not going to have the top A-level results, then I would just encourage you to make sure that you're applying to a variety of different institutions in the US. So maybe some that are going to be less competitive than those highly competitive ones. I have a couple of different people who are asking some master's related questions or questions about the Fulbright scholarship, which is only available at the master's level. So if you are interested in learning more about master's degrees, I highly recommend you go to our website and you go to our events page, and we will offer a Postgrad USA webinar at the beginning of October. And so I recommend that if you're interested in learning more about a master's in the US, that you check that out. Let's see. Somebody's asking if there's a way to waive the application fees, and if so, how? And so different universities have different policies on this. There is a possibility to waive application fees. And so what I would recommend is just checking the websites of the different universities where you're planning to apply to see what their policy is on that. And you'll be able to see how to go about doing that. Somebody's asking about universities that would allow BTECs and Cambridge technical qualifications. And I'll admit I'm more familiar with BTECs than I am with the Cambridge technical qualifications. But if Cambridge technical qualifications are similar level to BTECs, then it'll be a similar answer. And so if you're looking to apply to highly competitive universities, usually a university is going to be expecting to see 3 or more A-levels from a student, or advanced hires from a student here in the UK, or IB classes. There are universities that do accept BTECs in the US, but they tend to be the less competitive ones. So just to be aware about that. Somebody's asking if there's a list of what colleges are attending the fair in September. That is a great question. So we're in the process of updating the website with that. At the moment, if you go to our website, we have like the USA College Day search, and it includes a list of universities that are coming this year, as well as some of the universities that were there last year. I would say probably by mid-August, around the time that the tickets, kind of mid to late August, around the time that the tickets become available, you'll be able to find a list of what colleges are attending the fair on the website. So keep an eye out for that. Somebody's asking if students are ever concerned about safety in the US. I think that's a really good question. They're asking specifically, are UK students ever concerned about safety? And I think that just in general, students are concerned about safety no matter where they are. But with what we hear about the news in the US, I think that people in the UK may have slightly higher concerns about different concerns than you might have here in the UK. And I would say that student safety is a very high priority for universities. And so if you do ever have any questions or concerns about that, this is something that you can ask US universities about. And they're used to answering these questions, especially to international students. And so you can see what kinds of policies that they have in place to keep students safe and on campus. And so don't hesitate to ask those types of questions, but do know that US universities do prioritize safety. Their students' safety is a high priority. So I think those are most of the questions that I am seeing here. So if you have any other questions, go ahead and put them in the chat now. Otherwise, I hope that you enjoyed this presentation and that you learned from it. I'll be sending out the recording next week, so keep an eye out for that in your inbox. And please do sign up for USA College Day at the end of September. If it's something that you're interested in attending, or at least sign up for the mailing list to be informed of when tickets become available. And I hope to see you there. Thank you so much for tuning in this evening, and have a good night. Bye.